It's really my pleasure to once again introduce Francis Thicke. And he's such a pioneer in organic agriculture broadly. As I told the group this morning, my own story, even intersecting, I look over here at John Wood, who's a fellow Iowa State alumni. When I spent 30 years away from the Midwest in the oil and gas industry, and I started learning about regenerative agriculture and soil carbon. One of my first stops to go learn more was going back to my alma mater in Ames at the USDA Environmental Laboratory, Jerry Hatfield there. And Jerry was told to invite people who were pioneers in the state, and Francis was one of them. That was the first time we had a chance to meet. So you're really in for a treat today to listen to what Francis has done as a pioneer in dairy, all the way from the production through to the marketing and developing a relationship with his customers and making this work as a business in Iowa. So Francis, over to you.
And Russ, you're welcome if you want to go somewhere else and watch somebody else and not listen to my lame jokes again. Okay. Well, the title of the talk said from grass to the grocery store shelf, but I actually want to go further back and look all the way from the soil, kind of. I'm going to talk about our on-farm processing and all, but I want to start more basic first. But first of all, I wanted to mention, as it said in the program, my own background is I grew up on a dairy farm in Minnesota, and I went to college. I got a degree in music and philosophy, and then I came back and farmed for 9 years. And during that time, my brothers and I converted the farm in 1975 to organic, and then went back to graduate school and did a master's and a PhD in soil fertility. And I didn't tell them I had been an organic farmer back then because they didn't think that was a very good thing back at the land-grant colleges. So and I worked at USDA too for a while, and I didn't tell them there either. But I'm actually, so I'm a recovering bureaucrat, and but it gives me license to tell you a little anecdote about bureaucrats, Washington bureaucrats, and it's about oil, which Russ is the expert on here. But you know, in 2008, the price of oil shot up to like $157 a barrel or something, maybe 147, and then in a few months it went down to like less than $50 a barrel. It's been going up and down ever since, and nobody seems to be able to predict the price of oil. A friend of mine, a farmer, said, the reason is that nobody's checking the oil. You see, most of the oil in the country is under Texas and Oklahoma, but all the dipsticks are in Washington, D.C. Iowa likes to boast about their great soils, and they have some of the best soils in the world in northern Iowa. But when you think about it, 12,000 years ago when the glacier left, it just dropped all this loose geologic material on what was to become Iowa, and there wasn't really any soil at all. It was just a mess, just a wasteland. And only as plants and animals colonized that geologic material that they created soil. And I define soil as geologic material affected by plant growth with organic matter in it. So that black organic matter, that's what makes soil. And you know, in Iowa, since we started farming in Iowa, we've lost about 60% of the black organic carbon to oxidation. And we've lost about half our topsoil in Iowa on average to erosion. So all these years we've been deficit spending our ecological capital. But now it's really exciting with the grazing systems that we're coming up with, and even some cropping systems that we can actually rebuild soil in place. And so it won't have to be the case in the future that the longer we farm, the more we destroy our soils. We can actually reverse that process. It's exciting. And part of the process in Iowa that got this tremendous soil resource was the prairies. And we know the prairies were very diverse and productive. They were very tall and deep-rooted. And part of that interaction with the bison and the prairie grasses created that soil, because the roots would go down deep and the bison would come in and graze that off. And then when the plant was short, it didn't need that all that root mass. It sloughed some of that mass off into the ground, grow new tops, grow more roots. And so those grazing episodes pulsed that organic matter in the soil and created those black, rich soils. And the thing is that's interesting is that to make that happen, the prairie didn't need any fertilizers or pesticides, or it all happened with the power of ecology. And some of the factors are it's very diverse, and it's self-sufficient. It didn't take those inputs, and it recycles very tightly, because the waste of one species is food for other species. So everything is cycled, nothing is wasted compared to our agriculture. And what I wanted to do was compare that. This is comparing an ecological system or an ecological agriculture with an industrial kind of agriculture. And the first thing we see is that biodiversity is replaced by a monoculture, whether it's monoculture wheat in Montana or cotton in California, corn, soybeans in the Midwest, these monocultures. And that's not really how nature organizes it. Even the animals, we put them in monocultures, thousands of hogs in one place. In Iowa, we have 20 million hogs in these CAFOs, 10,000 turkeys in this building, thousands of cows in a dairy CAFO in the desert. That's not the way nature organizes it, right? This is the largest feedlot in the country in Idaho, 150,000 head. And the guy who took the picture said this only showed about 15%. As he turned off to your right, he said as far as you could see, it was black with the animals. And again, this is not the way nature organizes it. And so we can see how this industrial system causes a lot of problems. And if you go inside of them, you see that it's not so good for the animals to be in that. It's not very humane to be in these kind of confined systems for their lives. And in Iowa, also, we have 60 million chickens in cages. And these cages are so small that they have 4 to 6 chickens in it, and one of them couldn't reach out and spread its wings out. So this is something that needs to change. I think we all agree, for many reasons. And also that self-sufficiency of an ecology is replaced by the need for high inputs. To grow that corn as a monoculture it takes fungicides in the seeds normally, and insecticides and herbicides to keep the other plants out, and a lot of energy, especially for the nitrogen fertilizer. And it tends to be a leaky system, unlike the prairie that cycles everything. The ecology cycles everything. It leaks, the monoculture. In Iowa, we have a lot of leaks. We have been having hundreds of manure spills from the CAFOs, causing literally millions of fish being killed over the last 10 years. And the thing about Iowa, or Midwest agriculture, is it's inherently leaky. And that's something that isn't well understood by the politicians who are trying to work on water quality, and by even the farmers, is that the system is inherently leaky. It's flawed. And because, for example, Iowa, 2/3 of Iowa's land surface is covered in corn and soybeans every year. And below most of the land in Iowa, there is about 4 feet down is tile drainage. And so when the water percolates down, it hits the tile drain and goes out. The thing is, though, that corn and soybeans only have live roots in the soil for about 5 months or less of the year. So during most of the year, there are no live roots in the soil. So when the water percolates down and takes nitrate with it, nothing is there to scavenge it. And that's something, see, people tend to think, well, we got bad water, we got nitrate in there, we need to just use a little less nitrogen. But the research shows that even if we optimize the use of nitrogen fertilizer, we can only reduce our nitrate leaching by about 5 or 10%. Because the real problem is the system is flawed, and it leaks even from natural organic matter that's being mineralized, that's being dumped into the tile drains. And of course, that ends up contributing to the dead zone, which the nitrogen is a limiting nutrient for the dead zone. This is a little illustration of what's happening there. I think it's pretty interesting. This is from Minnesota. It's a few years old, but it's really the same thing today as corn and soybean rotation. And what they did is they looked at how much nitrate came out of the tile drains over 4 years, cumulative. And the corn and soybean, the corn, continuous corn, leaked 194 pounds per acre. If you look down here, the alfalfa in the CRP, the perennials that had live roots in the soil all year round, they hardly leaked any. 30 to 40 times less nitrate leaked out of the system. And interestingly, alfalfa, which is a legume, will fix its own nitrogen if it needs to. It was almost as good as grass at scavenging that nitrate because it has live roots, and that's the key thing that is not too well understood. The other interesting thing is that the soybean rotation leaked almost as bad as corn. And we don't put nitrogen fertilizer on soybeans in Iowa as a rule. And soybeans, of course, are a legume and will fix their own nitrogen. But they leak nitrogen as bad as corn, showing that the principle is that because there are no live roots there in the ground, the corn and soybeans act very similarly. They leak about the same. Just to kind of show how that works, this is during the year from spring till fall, or back through the winter. As it starts to warm up in the spring, this is a line showing how much nitrate is mineralized out of the soil organic matter. As it warms up, the soil starts to circulate nitrogen around, and some of the nitrate comes out into solution into the water. And it's before, here's the growth of corn and soybeans. So the nitrogen is starting to release before the corn and soybeans are starting to take up nitrogen. So that means that there's this period of time here where there's this excess nitrate in the soil that's just ready to be leached out. And then once we get growing on the corn and soybeans, then it's taken up all of it here that's being mineralized. And here it actually is needing more. It's more than is available from the soil. That's where the fertilizer, of course, comes in. And then the plant gets to the end of its cycle, corn and soybeans, and then after that, we have another time period where the soil is still mineralizing. It's still warm enough to mineralize nitrate out, and then we have leaching again. So if you can imagine right here, if we put a cover crop in, as soon as this corn and soybeans are dead, the cover crop is starting to grow. We have another little line here, green line, where it's taking up that nitrate, and even into the spring, so it can take all this nitrogen up. Then we could really solve it ecologically. Because what Ray Atchula said the other day is that most of our conservation practices are like, I liked what he said, conservation diapers. You know, we can't manage it on the soil surface, so we're going to catch it down at the bottom with a diaper. But if we can do it ecologically, solve the problem, then we don't need those diapers. Okay, and of course, so a cover crop put into a corn and soybean field will make a big difference. But I think we can even do better than that. However, most of Iowa's land in the fall is like this, all winter long. This is soybean field, nothing growing on it. This is a corn field it's all tilled, which is even worse. So the ideal thing is to have something growing all the time, and that's my goal on my farm. I'm going to show you a little later how I'm trying to do that. And of course, grazing is the biggest thing that I'm doing, and I'll show you, I'll talk about here. But just to show you how the lack of resilience of these systems. Remember, corn and soybeans cover 2/3 of Iowa's total land surface. And when it rains, now we're getting more and more floods, and it's a really problem because the corn and soybeans are not active all year round. This isn't from my farm here, from what happened upstream. This is a little creek goes through my farm. Usually it's about a foot or less deep. And in 2008, we had a big flood. Maybe you heard about it in Iowa. And we had all this rain, and it kind of quit like late May. But the floods were still going on because it was still coming into the rivers. And then there was a week without any rain. Now that was about the 1st of June. And but the soils are saturated. Now, then we got, after a week, we got 2-inch rainfall in 1 hour. And that's what caused the rain. This little creek rose from here to here, this wide, 250 feet wide, just from that 2-inch rain in 1 hour. Now we're getting 5-inch rains, too, so, and who knows, 10, 15-inch rain. And so the whole valley became a raging river here, just from that 2-inch rain. And if you look upstream, well, I've been grazing for 2 months before that. And so during that week without rain, my crops were growing fast and they were sucking the water out. It was actually getting a little dry. And that 2-inch rain went right into the soil where the grazing system. But because upstream, my neighbors had corn and soybeans that were just being planted or not even planted yet, the soil was saturated with water, couldn't take a drop in. So it all ran right off. And so they should have had at least a waterway here, of course. But even here, where in a no-till situation, you can see how the corn stalks even went right off into the ditch. But then you multiply it out across 2/3 of the surface of the land is corn and soybeans. You can see why we had tremendous floods, because we just don't have any resilience there. And this little research from Iowa State illustrates that. What they did is they tried to see how much water would infiltrate into the soil with 1 hour simulated rainfall, 1 hour. And they compared different systems. And what they found is that the perennials, kind of like what we are, some of our grazing things, they absorbed in that 1 hour 5 to 7 times more rainfall than the corn and soybeans. And what's really interesting is the continuously grazed pasture was as bad as or worse than corn and soybeans. So we can see how if we can make that landscape more resilient, we can solve a lot of our problems that we're really causing by our cropping systems. Now, one last thing I want to say before I go on to more positive things, and that is, here we see a hog cave full. This is one that got a lagoon. Most of Iowa's have the pit under the building. But the point is that the manure is stored in a liquid form, and when it's in that liquid form, it turns anaerobic. And anybody who's driven by these, and they smell, right? And people say, oh, those hogs, they really smell bad. But it's not the hogs. It's not even the hog manure that smells. In that liquid state, the manure is changed. It produces about 300 volatile organic compounds, things like hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, and a whole range of more or less toxic materials that are created in that pit. So what you smell is not the hogs, it's not the manure, you're smelling the compounds created in that industrial storage system That's important to keep in mind because people don't understand that. And if you compare that to a cow dropping manure out in the pasture, now we know that underneath that cow patty are billions of bacteria just waiting for a meal. And here it comes, and so they're going to attack that. And when they decompose it, it's aerobic. It means that the byproducts are carbon dioxide and water. They're not any of these toxic compounds. And here on my farm, in the spring, I'll see some old dry cow patties. And I went out one spring and kicked over a bunch of them, and I could count like 30 to 40 earthworms in each one. And so that's the way nature decomposes things compared to that industrial system. And that's important to recognize, I believe. And also if you compost manure, it's also, if it's done right, it's aerobic, and it makes a good product. So now I want to go on and look more on the positive side. So how can we look at ecology as a model for how we can design and manage a farming system? Remember how the soils were developed, and we can use that. So we're going to try to harness the energy and efficiency and organizing power of nature's ecology. And I'm going to look at my farm a bit here as a model, and I'm sure many of you could do the same with your farm. I came back from DC as a soil scientist in 1992. In 96, we bought this farm here that in 92, for 4 years, we just rented a farm. And then we moved to this new farm. And this was all that was left of the farmstead, this old corn crib. But the land is pretty hilly for Iowa. Iowa, you think of flat land, but in southern Iowa, some of it's pretty hilly. And this land had been in corn and soybeans for many years. And this is one of my grass waterways. And most of my waterways were 2 to 4 foot gullies. It had been, it was an absentee landlord situation, and it was not taken care of at all. And in some places on the hillsides, all the topsoil was gone. I'm down to the B horizon. So in a way, it's kind of like the glacier just left, and I'm starting over again here, you know. But as people have been pointing out in this conference, you can build soil faster than nature if you do it right. But we're using nature to make it happen, of course. And so this is on the side hill, and at the bottom of this hill, the toe slopes, where the soil ended up. Then I have some of the black stuff that came off the side hill. So what I did is I planted the whole farm. At that point, I had 176 acres into a mixture of grasses and forbs, clovers, and so on, legumes, and basically cool season grasses. And split it up into about 60 paddocks. This is this thing here. This is where we milk the cows, the farmstead, and these are lanes going out of the pastures. And they're each about 1.5 acres to 2 acres. And they're set up so I can, usually I'll give them half a paddock in the morning or in the evening, and then the other half the other time, put a dividing wire in. And so I can split them up a lot. And I have 3 groups. One is the milking cows, about 80 to 90 cows. And one is the dry cows and the bred heifers. And one is the yearlings. So they rotate in different places. So the milk cows get fresh grass twice a day. And here you can see, where they've been, in the electric fence here is where they've been and where they're going. And especially during this time of the year when the grass is trying to head out, I try to do kind of a mob grazing sort of a ththing, where I usually use a leader follower. I'll come in first with the milk cows, and they'll take the best, and then I'll come back with the dry cows and bred heifers, which don't need quite as good a quality, and make them knock it down and eat it down. Because grasses like this, the cool season grasses head out once a year. They don't head out after that. After June, they're pretty much done heading out. Then they're in the vegetative stage. So once I've grazed them down or knocked them down, then they'll be vegetative. Then I can do more of a take half, leave half situation. Or I can be more flexible in my grazing system. And this, of course, is what we're not doing, which is what most of Iowa grazing is done. That's how it's done. Continuous grazing, and of course that's not very resilient. When the grass is short, the root system is pretty shallow. This is a little schematic of our picture of various kind of grazing system. This is ungrazed, and this is, you take half and leave half, which leaves a pretty good root system comparably. This is where you take a little more all the time, and you get less root left, and this is where you set stock or continuously graze, and you don't have very much root at all. And you can see how that's not very resilient, especially in a drought kind of situation. I just kind of threw this in. This is from Gabe Brown. It's actually from the Graze magazine. A chart looking at, this is pretty amazing. I'm a soil scientist, and most soil scientists would say this can't happen. This is Gabe's field here. He said he had no added fertilizer for how many years? For many years he hadn't had any added fertilizer. And he took a soil test, and things like phosphorus and potassium are way off the chart compared to his neighbors. without adding anything. And so soil fertility specialists tend to look at soils as a kind of a beaker, you know. You got to have a beaker. If you're going to grow corn, you need so much phosphorus in your beaker, and if you grow the corn, then you got to add that much back in. They don't look at it as a biological kind of thing. And to see this happen is pretty amazing, that if we can actually regenerate soils to this extent, this quickly, that's going to put soil fertility standard upside down, you know, the science of soil fertility. It's going to take a while for them to even start looking at it, I think, very seriously. And this is not my farm, but I wanted to show you it's relative to the energy use. You know, when cows are in the feedlot, they're just waiting for you to bring the feed to them. And so instead of them grazing, of course, you have to cut the forage, chop it, here in this case, put it into storage, and then feed them daily, and then scrape up the manure and take it back out again. All those steps take a lot of energy. And without cheap fossil fuels, cheap oil, we never would have done that, I'm sure. But that's the way we are now. And but if you can design the pasture system right, all we have to do after each milking is open the next gate. When you open it across the lane, the cows are shunted right into the pasture. We close the gate. They do the work. They do all their own harvesting. They spread their own manure right where it needs to be. They enjoy their work, and they're healthier because they're in their natural environment, and they live longer. Now, they don't produce as much milk, of course, as a cow standing on concrete and eating corn, but they live longer and are healthier. And actually, the last few years, when it came to tax time, we have the different categories: feed cost, supplement, supplies and repairs. And veterinary bill was zero for the last 3 years. So I never had a veterinarian out, except my wife had it for the dog, but her dog. Otherwise, I haven't had. I'm sorry? So it pays for itself, you know. It's kind of nice to have that. And of course, then you can avoid a lot of equipment costs if we can do most of our work, a lot of our work on the dairy with just the four-wheelers instead of the big harvesting equipment. It saves a lot of fuel. Now, looking at parts of our infrastructure, so I have a lot of lanes in the farm, and at first they got muddy and rutted up, so I had to shape them. I shaped them, crowned them, put berms on it, and I put heavy rock on the bottom and fine rock on top. And it's been really durable. I've had this for 20 years or more, and it allows me to get the cows out in the pasture at any time, any kind of weather. And even in the wintertime, I winter them out there now. And even like if it's rainy, when you get them in a paddock, they'll mud it up a bit, but since they're only in that part for half a day, it recovers fine. And sometimes I use that to my advantage, actually, because I try to keep 30-40% clover in the paddocks. And often the clover will diminish and the grass will get sod-bound. So when it's wet and rainy, I'll put the cows in those sod-bound paddocks, and they'll chop it up and make more space for clovers to take off and do better. Then we have a water system, so the cows have water in all the paddocks. It's pretty simple. I buried a 1-inch plastic pipe about 8 inches down, and it just has a little, we dug down, put a T in, brought it up, got a shutoff valve here, a simple float. I got free 55-gallon barrels cut up and put in there. Electric fence comes up to here. I used a couple feet of a 3/4-inch electric conduit for the insulators to keep it away from the water, and up and over with the electric fence and on. And the way I put that in is the pipe. I got a single shank subsoiler and put on, made an attachment of a curved pipe to inject the plastic pipe. And this basically is just an axle of an old 5-wheel rake. And so then I can drive right through the farm. And I made a unroller put a 1,000-foot roll of plastic pipe on there and stick the pipe in there, and then I could drive right through the whole farm. And then whenever I needed a water tank, I just cut down and bring up the water. So it works pretty well. And actually, I get the water from solar power. In the back of the farm, on the highest point of the farm, I put a 6,000-gallon tank. And then here's a solar panel with a pump in the pond, and the solar panel drives the pump to fill this tank. I oversourced it, oversized it, so I can fill that tank like in just over half a day. And so even in the cloudy day, it pumps slowly. It'll keep up with the cows. So that it works pretty well in that way. And even, see, in rural Iowa, in southern Iowa, we don't have good well water. Unless you go down about 2,000 feet, you can't get any kind of good well water. So this is pretty good because most farms, and we also get water from what's called rural water. It's like city water pumped out in the countryside. which is quite expensive. And if you run your tank over all night long, it's going to cost a lot. So this way, if I run my tank over, even drain that whole tank, next morning it'll pump it up again, and I'm ready to go. So I really like that system. Also, I have some waters for outwintering in the, in the wintertime. This, below the dike right down here is this water tank here. And this thing has a tube, a tube that goes down into the ground about 8 feet. And that ground source heat keeps it from freezing hard. When I come out and check the cows in the morning, if it's been real cold, I can just hit it with my fist and break the ice. And so they can have water all winter long without any kind of energy source. And another pond I have has also a frost-free water. The water goes under the dike and it comes to this thing. But this is a different system. This one overflows constantly. But instead of overflowing on the ground, it overflows to a standpipe. And the standpipe then takes it off to a ditch nearby. So that little trickle of water will actually keep the water from freezing in below zero weather, which surprised me. So I really like that kind of a system. Also, I've gone to mostly solar-powered electric fences. I used to have one big one that I'd power the whole farm, and you get a lot of, chasing after shorts all over. But now I just have each section, I can just pick up this portable solar-powered thing and bring it over to each section and power it when I'm grazing in that section. And I have a number of these that work pretty well for that system, I think. Other energy things we've done, this is our processing plant. I'm going to talk about it in a little bit. We put on some hot water, solar hot water system panels. They're 4 feet by 10 feet, and they will preheat the water for our hot water, which helps a bit too. And we put in a 40 kilowatt wind turbine here a few years ago. If you're thinking about going alternative energy, go solar. It's my recommendation. It's on the ground, no moving parts. It's gone, since I started this project, solar prices have gone down about 80%. And the wind generator people on this size, they're very unreliable. I could use stronger words, but the guy I had contracted with, he abandoned the project halfway through, and so I had to finish the installation myself. So it's a little tricky crawling up that on spikes. There's some spikes crawling up here to crawl up there to work on it while my electrician was down below. But I got used to it. So another part of our ecology of our farm is the chickens. A lot of people have used chickens for fly control, and open the door and out come the chickens, and away they go. And it's kind of fun to watch them. Here they're trying to pick some flies off a cow's back. Here's one up on top of a cow's back. And they're amazing little creatures. One day I saw one with a mouse in its beak here, and they were fighting over it. And since then I've found that if a mouse runs near the chicken, it's like Jurassic Park. And they're built like a T-Rex, aren't they? One pick and a shake and that mouse is gone. And they're amazing. Here, now I'm kind of embarrassed again here too, because I'm talking about feeding the bulls some grain by the parlor. I don't feed my bulls any grain anymore, but I do feed some grain to my cows, I'll admit it. I about 4 to 5 pounds that I feed the cows grain. And I'm cutting back. Maybe someday I'll go without, but my milking parlor is set up for grain right now to get them in the barn. Anyway, anytime he spilled a little bit of feed, they were right there picking it up. And you can see they're kind of plump, these chickens. It's not like they're hungry, but they can't help themselves. That's the way nature works. One day I saw they were gathered around, and I looked, and I had driven by with an alfalfa bale, and a piece of alfalfa had fallen off, and they stripped all the leaves off it. So that just kind of shows how nature works. Nature wants to just recycle everything and scavenge it. And then they work for free all day, and when it's time to lay an egg, they run in that chicken house and lay their egg, and then they come back out and go to work again. So it's a pretty good deal, actually. Now, I had the chickens following the cows around the pasture, but what happened is the coyotes were eating the chickens, so I now keep them at home, and I'll show you in a bit. I'm trying to have other things I think help with the out in the pasture situation. So I built another little chicken house, and I just wanted to show you this, that I built a little in and out door for them, and I found online this chicken coop door opener, a fun little thing. That's what they call it. And basically it has a fish line going from here down to the door, and it has 2 set points on this timer, and the timer's up here. And when the timer kicks this on, there's a spool there. It just rolls up that fish line and pulls the door up. And then when it hits it at night, she clicks it again and it unrolls it and the door goes down. which is really nice because we always, have trouble with remembering sometimes if the door is shut or not. And if you don't shut the door, it's trouble. So this is pretty good. The little technology things can help sometimes, huh? But now that we have the chickens around the barnyard, and since we have so much more diversity on the farm, I've been seeing a lot more wildlife, like the wild turkeys following around where the cows have been, and seeing swallows flying over, bank swallows flying over the cows, and flocks of cowbirds sitting on the cows' backs and their faces, and I've even seen cow egrets a few times. So I'm hoping that nature can kind of do what the chickens were supposed to do and do it without me having to do anything. So that's kind of good if we can get nature to do it for us. Now, our fly control, it's not like a one silver bullet. I like to think of, instead of silver bullet, silver buckshot, that a lot of things that all together do the job. And here in the parlor, we have these sticky tape that we roll out. They come in about 2,000-foot roll, and they roll from the front to the back. We have 3 of them stripped across the ceiling. And when the cows come in, the flies go up, and they get caught in that little sticky tape, and then you roll it up, and then you have fresh tape for the next time. And that gets a lot of flies. Also, one of our workers in the processing plant had been up at the Lake of the Woods in northern Minnesota, and she brought back some fly repellent, and it said the active ingredient was soybean oil. So we found that soybean oil actually will kill flies. And we have an organic soybean extruder nearby, and so I can get soybean oil by 5-gallon bucket. And so I started first by using a paint sprayer with a high pressure, turn it wide open and blast them on the back. And then I found a cordless one, which is really nice because I can take it out into the pasture too and hit dry cows and the yearlings and so on. So what we do is when the cows have flies on them, we spray them, and these are horn flies. You can tell by how they're sitting there, but they look alive, but they're actually dead. It'll kill the horn flies pretty much on contact. And the bigger flies, like the stable flies, if you hit them hard enough, it'll kill them. But otherwise, they kind of get in a tizzy and they end up in the sticky tape by the end of milking anyway. So that's one thing that is pretty helpful. You can see here that when I blasted them on their back, these are the horn flies that flew off in the back and landed up back here dead. So in the manure catcher in the back. Also in the spring, early in the year, I usually use some predator flies. I get these in the mail in a package. There's about enough. These are fly larvae. They will hatch out these little bitty flies here, and there's enough in that package to hatch out about 65,000 of those little flies. So I spread those where the flies will be hatching. And I kind of made an oversized salt shaker here and stick them in there, and then I can drive around with the four-wheeler and shake them out wherever I need them, like around the barnyard. And also, I do some outwintering, and if you look where the flies hatch, you can see the maggots where there's like a bedding pack manure. And if you've been feeding hay out in the pasture and you got some residual hay, that can be where their flies are hatching. So I'll go out and I'll shake these things out there in those areas, and who knows? I don't monitor enough to know, but it seems like it makes sense to me anyway. And our flies aren't that bad. And this is what I was trying to ask about the other day with the dung beetles. In the pastures, by the time I get the cows in the evening, the day's manure is usually full of all these holes of dung beetles. And these are the tunneler dung beetles. They go in there, and they don't really break down the manure patty that much. But Jonathan said that they're probably, hollowing it out inside. But if you go inside and look at them, they're very elusive. I was digging around looking for one. There's one right there. But as soon as you uncover them, they just crawl right in there again, and you can't hardly find them. They're just like very, very shy little things. But what I was hoping to have is, how many people have these roller dung beetles? Anybody have them on your farm? You have roller dung beetles? Yeah, you have some? Cool. That's what I kind of would like to have. You hear about these things, they'll tear apart a cow patty in little balls, and they roll them off and bury them and lay their eggs in there, so they can tear up a cow patty like very quickly. And that way you can really avoid having flies hatching. So I'm still hoping I can get some that will live in my part of the country and see if they'll do the job. That'd be nice to have. I figure if I can import cool season grasses, maybe I can import some roller dung beetles, I was going to say, if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to yell them out. I can repeat them for the sake of the tape if you want. But Another thing I have is that you've probably seen these little stinky traps. And I saw online somebody made a big stinky trap. It's a 55-gallon barrel and just cut some holes in the side and put 2-inch PVC pipe in. It goes a little stubby elbow and then goes down a couple inches. And then that's where the flies get in. And I throw in some roadkill or maybe some attractant or something like that, something that stinks bad. And then on top there's plexiglass, so the light comes in, there's water in the bottom. So the flies, they smell that, they crawl in there, they fly up to the light and they can't get out, and eventually they end up in the water. And if you have a lot of flies any place, you can catch them by the millions with this thing. You can just see them streaming in there. It's pretty amazing. This doesn't work so well, I've been finding, where you don't have a lot of flies, because it seems to run out after a while. But if you get a lot of flies, they'll keep on replenishing and they start stinking too, and it's kind of regenerative, you might say. I've been leaving my calves, my female calves, the heifers, with the cows for about 3 months, sometimes a little longer, because I think it's a really easy way for them to be raised. They're healthier, and they seem to like it. And so at about 3 months, I wean them. The bull calves I don't keep. I get rid of them right away after they get the colostrum. We usually have a lot of people calling me. I kind of a waiting list in the neighborhood of families that want a bull calf to raise. Some of them, the kids take them to 4-H, to the fair, and so on. But the heifers, we raise most of them. And like I told the last group, at about 3 months, they get kind of independent. They kind of turn into juvenile delinquents. And they won't come when their mothers call, and they run around in gangs, and they get high on grass.
I have a question.
Yes.
I've done it, I milk cows as well, but I've raised male calves on and off on nurse cows, and do you run them with the milking herd, or do you segregate them in the paddock?
Well, the question was, do we run the heifers with the milking herd? We run them all together. And so when the cows come into the milking parlor, the calves just stay back, and the mothers run through. By about 3 months, when the calf is 3 months old, they're usually drinking most of the cow's milk.
Right.
By then, it's kind of even wash, and that's one good reason to wean them too. And when we wean them, I've got this barn right in the cow yard with an open front and gates. And so what I do is I just kind of trick them into going in there, and then they're in there. And then the mothers know where they are. I think it helps a lot if the mothers know where they are, and then the cows come home and they can kind of visit across the fence and so on. And I always, my customers, they kind of wonder about how we do it. And I tell them it's kind of like a Jewish kibbutz, The kids stay home in the group, and then mothers go home, go work and come back and visit the kids, So it works pretty well to wean them that way. And I do feed some grain to the cows, and I feed some grain to the calves when I wean them. I make sure they have some grass to eat and they have good hay, but I do feed them some grain to help transition that. So I try to stretch the grazing season as long as I can. And you can see the trees here are just starting to bud out, and so as soon as the grass starts to take off, I'll start to graze so I can sequence the whole farm. Now I got to be careful. I've been backing off a little. I used to start the 1st of April, and I even started once on March 15th. But what happens is it can be like 75 degrees, and then all of a sudden it starts to get cold, and coming around the rotation, and pretty soon you're going to run out of grass. So I've been backing off a little bit more in the spring. But in the fall, I try to extend as long as I can. I'll stockpile grass in back hay fields, and then I'll graze that until, I can sometimes go until the 1st of December if the weather holds out and allows me to do that. So the reason I try to stretch that out because, as I'll show you later, we sell our milk locally, bottled milk and so on, and people, you can see that yellow color, and it's healthier, I guess, we all know that. So I try to keep that grass influence as long as possible. And another thing that I do is try to keep some kind of shade for the cows. And as I mentioned, this farm had been pretty much abandoned and beat up, and all the fence lines had trees, which was good, which farmers don't think is good, but it was good because I had a place for shade. And so what I used to do, most of my pastures are long and narrow, and the backs usually have trees. And so I would put them in the front at night with no trees, and then in the back in the daytime when there are trees. However, after 20 years, I can see I'm transporting my nutrients to the back of the paddock. So what I did here is I finally broke down and bought one of these shades. You saw it out here probably and it's not cheap, no question about it. But it's my way to to change the nutrient flow. And the reason I have hay here is that this year we had a tremendous drought. From May through September, we had almost no rain till just last week. A little bit here and there. And the grass was pretty much dormant. And so I was just giving him a little bit of grass and then giving him hay along with it. But then we got 5.5 inches of rain about a week ago, all in one night. And it worked out really well because I had big cracks in the soil and it just kind of all went down there and hardly even if it ran off. So it kind of recharged my soil overnight. Yes?
What's in the background? What are the housing back there?
There's a housing development right behind me, yeah.
People housing, not livestock housing. Okay.
Not livestock, yeah. A people cafo, yeah. Somebody else has, okay. So this is a way for me to use the shade. It's a way, now I reverse it. I used to give them the part at night without any trees. Now I give them the part during the daytime without any trees and lock them away from the trees. And then they have to be under the shade. They put the manure there. And at night I put them in the part with the trees and then they don't even go under the trees because it's not hot. And so now I'm kind of reversing that. And you can see how, here's where they were standing. And they spread their manure there and they kind of chop it up with their feet. And it was a great way to spread that manure out. And they don't all stand under at one time. They'll go out and graze and come back, and so as long as they get some relief from time to time, they're pretty happy with that. And of course, as the sun goes from east to west, the shade moves, and so this is about 40-foot diameter, but actually the area becomes quite a bit larger because the shade is moving. For wintering the cows, what I did at first, I have this building that's 80 feet long by 36 with open south-facing south face, and I would feed the hay there, and I had a bale unroller where I could put the bedding out. It worked really well. It was fine. I mean, it was a little bit of work, but it was a comfortable place for them. I had a windbreak on the side too. But by spring, I have about 3 or 4 feet of manure, the bedding pack to take care of, and that's a lot to break that up. And so, but it made great compost, ideal compost actually, heated up perfectly, and it was good for putting on that bad soil. I think it really helped inoculate my soil. But I didn't want to do that every day, so I started out wintering a while back. So now what I do is I select certain areas that I want to build the fertility up, and that's where I winter the cows. I guess we call it bale grazing these days. The funny thing is I've been doing this for 25 years, and somebody asked me a few years ago if I bale graze, and I didn't know what that was. But I guess I was after all. But I have fescue as a problem in this part of the country, and so you can see these lumps of tall fescue, endophyte infected, and so the cows won't eat, Jerseys won't eat it. Maybe a little bit in the spring they'll nibble on it, but and it's not good for them anyway. So when fescue invades too much, then I'll use that area for wintering, and so I'm going to have to renovate it then afterwards. And so it works pretty well. It's a pretty comfortable place for them to be in. You can see I have horns here, and for a while I let all the horns grow, and I thought that would be a nice romantic thing, and it was really nasty situation. The more horns they got, I thought, at first there was some damage, and then I thought, well, maybe if they all get horns, it'll be like detente, they'll hold off. But it wasn't. The more horns there were, the worse it was, and so I had to stop doing that. And now I just breed polled. It was amazing. And Jerseys are, maybe not all breeds are that way. Maybe Jerseys are just a prima donna, I don't know. But they really damage each other. So when it's snow, I put bedding down. Now my goal now is to put a lot of bedding down. I have quite a bit of small grains, and I have hay that sometimes that isn't so good, and I can roll that all out. And because now we're going to get really good use of that stuff, and the cows get double use. They get bedding, and then it also is building the soil. And so I can roll these bales out when there's snow. And another thing I've been doing too is for a windbreak, the northeast wind comes from this direction, northwest wind. And so I will set up the next week's hay in a pile. I did that a few times. And then when it's really windy, I'll feed the hay right behind that, in that windbreak. And when it's not windy, I can put the bales out further and they can eat further away. And then the next week's hay I can bring out and lay out here, and then I can use last week's hay from over there here. Now I mostly use baleage now anyway, but when it's really cold or windy, I will put them in a valley paddock with their trees, or else I'll keep them, if it's really bad, I'll keep them in the barn area with a windbreak. Because I found out if it's much below 10 degrees Fahrenheit and 10-mile-an-hour winds, there's danger of frostbite on the teeth. So I kind of a little careful about that anymore. It's not a good thing if you get that. And so by spring, you can, depending how you manage it, you can, this here is almost like a manure spreader came through and spread out the manure. You can get it coated pretty well. But I've actually been trying to make it, I've been making my area smaller, so I have it more intensive and I have a deeper mulch. Now, this last year, here's what I did. I tried to get it really thick, and I'm almost making a little thin compost pile here. I'm really building up the soil. And so you can see how deep that is there, the end of the pliers stuck in the ground. And it's a great combination of manure and bedding, carbon and nitrogen, that I think is really building the soil. And I let it sit for a few months. After wintering, I leave it sit there until like early summer at least, or maybe midsummer. And then I can do several things. One thing I can do is, well, first of all, is I'm going to look a little bit at I try to worry about water quality. Of course, this isn't what I do there. This is the extreme of what happens sometimes in Iowa with, which you can see if you're spreading manure on that snow, it's already running down the hill, that's not going to be a good situation, right? So I try to think about water quality when I'm doing this. And one thing is that when the manure comes out of the cow, it's 101 degrees, their body temperature, and it hits the snow and it melts down inside there, and it freezes. And so it's like a hard clump here, and like I'm standing on them there, and the four-wheeler's on them. And you can see that between that holding its integrity, it will help a lot for the water quality compared to the liquid manure. And also this carbon in there will help filter it and to keep the solids in place anyway. So, and I try to avoid putting it in waterways, the hay. So I'm doing my best to try to protect the water quality at the same time. So then what I can do is come back in the middle of summer or sometime, depending upon what's going on, you know, I'm experimenting around, and plant sorghum Sudan grass. And that's got all that fertility now, and it pops up and goes. And then when I want to graze it, I run the four-wheeler right down through there and put my dividing wire in, and then they can graze right up to that.
Establish into the sod?
I'm sorry?
Do you establish into the sod?
I'm sorry?
How do you start the sorghum?
How do I
start it? How do you seed it?
How do I seed it? I can no-till. In this case, I'll no-till it in.
Into the sod?
I'll no-till right into the sod, yeah. And the thing is that when you got that much cover, is that it pretty much kills the sod. And you know, before, with that fescue, it's really hard to kill that fescue. And for example, early on when I started farming there, I had fescue, and I came in one time with a disc in the fall, and I disked it 4 times, and I shattered it in the fall. Next spring I came back and it had multiplied, because it's really hard to kill it that way. So I normally will kill it with a rotavator, a Howard rotavator. I'll till it about 2.5 inches just under the crown, and it's like cutting sod, but it chops it. So normally that's how I will kill it when I need to. But in this case now I mulched it so heavily that I kill almost all of it just by the mulching process, which is kind of exciting to me. So my goal now is for the wintering area to cover every square foot with, if I can, you know, with mulch, and to try to kill everything just with mulching. And then I can avoid, maybe I can avoid any tillage. But in any case, this here, what I do, I come back in there and I no-till it in. And then I'll come in with sorghum Sudan grass and graze that, and then several times. And then I can come back in the fall with triticale or rye or wheat and no-till that in there, and then I can have another crop. And I'll put it in annuals for like 2 years in order to deplete the seed bank of the fescue. And then I'll come back, and I think I have some slides here.
What type of mulch do you use?
I'm sorry?
What type of mulch do you use?
What type of mulch do I use? Well, I was showing you, I unrolled the bales of straw and hay. It's that mulch when I was, they're bedding. Basically, their bedding is the mulch. So it gets double use, you know. Yeah. So you can see here the sorghum Sudan grass, if you graze it lightly, they'll strip the leaves off, and then it'll regrow out of the nodes, all the nodes on the sorghum Sudan grass. Or if I take it way down, it'll come out, it'll regrow out of the base, although probably not as much. But I can graze it several grazings, and then I can come back with something like, this was here, I think, triticale that I planted, and then I can graze that in the fall and again in the spring. So, and I'm trying to go to more diversified cover crops now. I'm still learning, you know, and like I see so many people having such good luck with all these diversified cover crops, so I'm going to try to do some more of that. But I figure I'm getting somewheres anyway by putting a cover crop down. And then after that, I can come back and plant my desired grasses, try to get as much diversity as I can for my permanent seeding. And then it's after all that fertility goes in there, it's really a productive pasture. It really produces after that.
So are you just doing that on the north, Francis, or are you doing it in wider areas?
What I do is I've been doing about 10 acres in the wintertime. My pastures are about 1.5 acres to 2 acres, so I just pull the dividing wires out, and I use the whole area for wintering. But this last year, I cut it down to like about 3 or 4 acres, and because then I can get much thicker mulch and much more intensive. And I think I'm trying that now. I like that idea because I can really build that soil up there, and then I can take a different area every time. I don't winter in the same place, so I keep moving around in order to try to build all the areas of the farm up. So speaking of the ecology then too, if an animal dies on the farm, it used to be that we would call a rendering works and they'd come and take it and they'd pay you when I was a kid. And then they stopped paying and then they started charging. And I thought it's kind of ridiculous for me to pay somebody to take nutrients off my farm. So now I will compost an animal if it dies. I'll lay down a thick layer of bedding manure and then cover it real thickly with, try to get about 2 feet of cover over the top of it so the coyotes don't dig in there. And it gets a really hot pile. Is amazing. It'll decompose all the flesh in like a month or two. The bones, I'm still trying to get done in less than geologic time. So here's our milking parlor. The cows come in one side and come out the other, and it's attached to our processing plant. Actually, we got a variance. The rules say you can't attach a milking facility to processing plant, but because I have in between here, I have a milk house and an office and a utility room, several doors. They allowed us to hook them together, so that was good. Otherwise, you have to. Our old facility, we had them about this far apart and then our pipes would freeze in the wintertime between batches of milk. So this helps a lot. And this is our truck that delivers them to the store. We sell it all locally, I'll tell you in a minute here too. And so I have a New Zealand style, swing style parlor, eight on a side. It's nothing fancy, not like the modern American style, nothing computerized. And then, as every dairy farm has a milk house with a bulk tank. And then here, what we're different about is this is the wall that goes into the processing plant. So we hook up on processing days, we hook up our pipes, sanitize them, and pump it through the wall, and it comes out from here into the vats. And these are our pasteurizing vats. This is 150 gallons, this is 200 gallons. And the vats have an air space around the outside, and we inject steam in. This is a steam boiler in the back that makes steam and injects it. We heat the milk up to 145 degrees for half an hour, which is the lowest temperature allowed by law. And you have to hold it that long then. For most milk is pasteurized at higher temperature for a shorter time, and the ultra high temperature pasteurized milk you've heard about, that is like 285 degrees for a half a second. So, but people seem to think that it tastes better if you don't pasteurize it so hard. And in Iowa, all milk has to be pasteurized. No raw milk is allowed. This is our cream separator, this little R2D2 guy. It's really a high-speed centrifuge, and it spins a bunch of cones real fast, and the milk is pumped through it. And the cream is oil, it's lighter, so it goes up through the center, but the skim milk is heavier, and it flies to the outside, and they each go out a different pipe into a different vat. And so that's how we get the skim milk. And most of the equipment is three-phase electrical. And so we have a converter. We only have single phase coming into our farm, so this converts it from single phase to three-phase to run like the separator and some of the other equipment. This is the bottler that we have. It's a 6-valve bottler. It's pretty old, probably 60 years old, but it does the job. It takes a little maintenance. An Amish guy bought it at an auction it was probably 20 years ago, and then he let it sit in his shop for about 5 years, and then he sold it to me I got it for $5,000, the whole thing. So he made $1,000 on it, but for sitting in his shop. But I priced them then, and it was like $45,000 for a used one, a reconditioned one. And this new stuff is really expensive. So basically, I'm kind of indicating I did this whole plant on the cheap, really, is that back then there was a fair bit of this old equipment around, and you could get it kind of cheap. Nowadays, it's pretty much gone, and new stuff is quite expensive. So to put a processing plant like ours together now would probably cost $250,000 to $500,000. And I probably have maybe $100,000 stuck into this one. So it takes a lot of maintenance, but that's my job. This is the bottler, yeah. And when the milk comes out of the vat, it's hot, and then it goes to the bottler. It has to be cold, refrigerated temperature. So we run it through a plate cooler, and the milk goes up and down every other plate, and ice water goes on the other side of the plate, and so it cools it right away. And outside, we have these tanks full of water that we make ice in. And then so the ice water runs through here and then into that plate cooler to cool the milk. And we make cheese also, we make some cheese, and this is actually a vat of cheese starting. It looks like milk, but, and it's not a real cheese vat. A real cheese vat is square and lower to the ground so you can work over it. Yes?
How many people do you have working on this farm?
My wife and I are full-time, and we have 4 other people working on the farm. And 2 of them are full-time and 2 of them are part-time. Yeah, so the processing takes a bit of work. And so this is actually the first stage of cheese making. We make it in a round vat, which is kind of unconventional, like a lot of what we do, I guess. And so to make the cheese, first step is to put the culture in, and then the next step is put the enzyme to coagulate it. So this looks like liquid, but it's actually one big curd. It's like a Jell-O. And so the next thing you have to is cube it up, is make it into the curds. And we don't have the real curd cutter, so we use a hamburger grill. Cut it in 3 dimensions, and then the curd it sits in the whey, and then we drain the whey and we wash it and so on, and put salt on it, and then we put it into blocks. This is a simple cheese. It's a Monterey Jack cheese. It's not aged. We sell it fresh, and people like it because the Jersey milk is high in fat, and we don't take any of the fat out. It's like 5 to 5.5% butter fat, so it's very buttery flavored, and people like it because of that. It's a little bit unusual, but it's a Monterey Jack cheese. But as I was learning a little bit about cheese making, I learned that brick cheese was named brick cheese because it was pressed with bricks, at least originally. And I was messing around different ways of pressing this cheese, and I had some blocks on it, and I thought maybe we have block cheese, But as I was experimenting around, one day I was using a hydraulic jack, and I realized we really had jack cheese then. But I found out since we don't need all that pressure. Just a few cement blocks for a few hours will do the job. So we have a couple of walk-in coolers, and most of our milk is either delivered the morning that we process it, like a bottle of milk, or else the following morning. So it's pretty, and we bottle milk twice a week, and we deliver to 3 grocery stores and about 20 restaurants. So the grocery stores get delivered twice a week, and we try to make sure, like we deliver Monday morning, but we only have enough to make it till Thursday morning. And so, the milk is only on the shelf for half a week normally. And then we also have another walk-in cooler that we use as an incubator. We also make yogurt. And for the yogurt, we pasteurize at 145 degrees, and then we lower the temperature to about 110, and then we add the culture there, and then we put it in the incubator, in the bottle, in the container, and then it makes yogurt in the container. It takes about 12 hours to make the yogurt in the container. And we try to keep the temperature a little bit lower. If you make yogurt at home, you might experiment. Try to keep it at 100 degrees or a little less, and you get a sweeter yogurt. If you go a little higher, it'll go faster, but it'll be more tart. So we make it there, and then you can see it has the heaters. We heat it up before we start and get it all warm, get the right temperature, and then by evening when I'm ready to go to bed, I check to make sure it's right. And then there's the cooler here, and it's plugged into a timer, so I can set the timer, and it'll come on like in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, and it'll start to cool it. So by morning it's cool, and we can take it off and send it right to the stores right away. And just to kind of walk you around the plant, this is our wash-up area. These are the cones that go inside of the cream separator, a power washer that will wash them. This is a power washer that washes the vat. We stick that inside the vat, and it'll wash out the inside of the vat. A cheese cutter for cutting the cheese that are 40-pound blocks. We make it into half-pound little pieces, and we put them. We shrink wrap them in here. Vacuum pack them, I should say. We also have the bigger ones for the restaurants. We give 5-pound pieces to the restaurants in the shrink wrap thing. And we do some shrink wrapping with the heat shrink wrapping too for the paneer. Anybody know what paneer is? Yeah, paneer is a form of cheese that basically it's kind of a quick coagulated cheese. We heat the milk up, and when it's pretty warm, we add in a acidifier. We put in some yogurt and we put in organic lemon juice, and it turns into curd just like that. We scoop the curd out and press it, and it turns into, and put it into little blocks and sell it in little half-pound blocks. And it's real hard, but it doesn't melt. So people use it in cooking. It's kind of like tofu. It'll absorb the spices, and it won't be melting in the food. So when we're making that paneer, we also can scoop some of that curd out and not press it. And we put milk with it, and then we make ricotta. We call that ricotta. And so we sell some ricotta too at the same time from the same batch. So we have to watch our temperatures and so on closely. Our thermometers, our vats have thermometers on them and a steam pressure gauge to tell us how much steam is going in there. And we have a permanent record for the inspector of all of our batches. You can't see it very well, but you can see this is temperature and time. As the temperature goes up, and this is turning around like a clock. Then here it gets up to 145 degrees, so we have to make a tick mark, and it goes off 145 degrees, and then we cool it down. You can see there's some previous batches right here. And so there's a permanent record of all the batches of pasteurized milk that we make. And then the inspector will come through and look at all those charts to make sure that none of them are, everything, that we always had the right temperatures on everything. And then he'll go through and check all of our equipment. He'll check our thermometers and our timers and everything like that. So we get inspected pretty rigorously, just like the big industrial dairy, the same inspector. This inspector also inspects our milking side and the other dairy farms, the milking facilities too. And it's unfortunate that he's retiring now, unfortunately, but he's been a really good person to work with. The inspector can make a big difference. I mean, some inspectors want to help you do a good job. Some inspectors are bean counters, and they just want to see how many points they can take off. And so I hope we get somebody who's as good as him when he retires. I told him he can't retire until I do, but he didn't listen, I guess. This is Susan, my wife, helping to calibrate the thermometers. So then we deliver it with our little refrigerated truck here, and to 3 restaurants and about 3 grocery stores and about 20 restaurants. And it's only with about a 5-mile radius, delivery radius. So that makes it a lot easier for us for development. And I should mention that Fairfield, Iowa is where we're at, and that's a little bit unique. And there are probably 2 reasons why we've been able to be successful in that community. One is that this dairy started with 2 cows in 1980, before I was involved. And it gradually grew. First it was raw milk, and it was a co-op, and then the state said they had to pasteurize, so they finally started pasteurizing. And then in 1992, my wife Susan and I took it over. We bought it, and they had about 20 cows in. And they gradually, as more people got interested in the product, we never advertised, just basically by word of mouth. We kind of grow the herd as our demand increased. So that's kind of how, and plus the other part, especially initially, is that Fairfield, Iowa is where the Transcendental Meditation Organization bought a university about 45 years ago. And so it brought people from all over the country, East Coast and West Coast and around the world, to live in that community. And a lot of them were very interested in health foods and in alternative energy, alternative building. So it made a good place. And I get a lot of visitors from other dairy farmers who want to process on the farm. And at first I used to tell them, no, it can't work anywhere but at Fairfield, forget it. And I didn't want to be responsible for them, failing. So I tried to talk them out of it. But as time, that was in the early 90s, and as time went on, it became clear that more and more people are interested in local foods, and now, it's obvious that if you live near a university town or a large metropolitan area, probably you can make it work. And now there are about a dozen on-farm processors in Fairfield. So this is one of the stores. It's a chain in Iowa, Hy-Vee stores, and this is everybody's. It's locally owned. It's called Everybody's Whole Foods, and they have a lot of whole foods and organic foods. All this produce is organic, and it's kind of interesting. Most grocery stores have a little corner for organic food. In this store, they have a little corner. So it's a good place to sell, right? Okay. And so this is our product on the shelf, and you can see we don't homogenize, so the cream rises to the top, and we leave all the fat in. every other milk that I know about, the whole milk is standardized to 3.25% butterfat. Well, the Jerseys give about 5 to 5.5% butterfat. So you can see this is the whole milk, half gallons. The cream line's about here. And our customers seem to know that whole foods, that whole milk is a whole food and skim milk is not a whole food. And here's the skim milk, these two little rows right here. And the vitamins are in the fat. And so they prefer this. And so the cream we do take off for the 2% and the skim milk, we bottle as whipping cream. And our yogurt, we don't have a cup filler, so we put it in tall quarts. Like this is yogurt here. And so they have to squeeze it out like a toothpaste tube. But they really like the yogurt. The Jersey yogurt, they just love it. So it sells itself. And we do the quarts for the restaurant, for the stores, and we do gallons for the restaurant. So we do about 100 gallons of yogurt a week. And the top, this is cream line too, so there's a plug of yogurt, like butter on top, which some people use for a spread. So like I said, we never advertise, we just by people liking, and the Jersey milk sells itself. Even the skim milk, which has no fat in it, has more protein and milk sugars. So people who drink the Jersey skim milk, they don't want to drink other skim milk because it's more like water, they tell me. And it's very interesting. A lot of people will come up to me, strangers even, and say that they can drink our milk, but they can't drink other milk, even other organic milk, and I don't know why. Maybe it's the homogenization. I don't know why it is, but so many people have come up and told it. It's kind of gratifying too that the local people really appreciate your product. You know, they'll stop you on the street and tell you that they like it. You got a question?
Yeah, what's your decision process in terms of the containers?
The containers.
Plastic containers, I
Yeah.
don't know if they're recycled or returned.
Right, that's a good question. I've struggled with that idea of plastic versus glass. And I would like to do glass, but my wife is the financial person on our farm, and she tells me that I have to prove to her that it's going to pay for itself, and I haven't been able to do that.
What about returning them?
Well, yes, it would be returnable, and the industry says that is about a 60% return rate on glass. But you do charge the full price of the bottle, so you don't really lose anything. So I'm still working at that idea. I haven't given up. But the plastic is recyclable. But I think the return rate on glass would be higher in a local community instead of have to go a long distance. So I'm still thinking it would be. But people have looked at kind of the environmental thing. It's kind of an even wash. With the glass, you have a big washer. I'd have to build a room on it. It cost me about $80,000 to $100,000 just to get a glass bottle washer set up. So that's the hurdle. And then there's all the hot water and there's the soaps and so on. Whereas the plastic, you got to buy each bottle all the time. They're about 25 cents to 30 cents for the bottle and cap. So, but that's recyclable. People can recycle the plastic. So, I don't know. But glass would be nice, no question about it. And the grocery stores, I have to talk them into it because they would have to deal with all that too. But I'm still haven't given up on it. Let's see. I wanted to point this too. We don't sell butter. But Susan makes butter and makes it into ghee, clarified butter. And so she does it in the summer when it's cows are on grass for the whole year. And you can see on the left, that is the ghee made from butter made from cows on grass. And one winter we ran out, and so she made some in February. The one on the right was the same cows, only they were having dry feed or stored feed. So isn't that pretty dramatic, isn't it?
Yellow food coloring.
Yeah, we use yellow food coloring.
Vitamin concentrations in that must be off the charts.
Yeah. So we at least get it year-round. So that's the main thing I had with the cows, I believe. Yeah, I was going to talk a little bit about other things, but maybe, are there any other points any questions you want to ask her? Yes.
Are you running a seasonal herd, or are you calving it all year round?
I have to calve all year round because we have to have milk all year round. Our customers would be very unhappy if we didn't have milk all winter long. Yes? In the back you had something, yeah?
How much does your milk sell for a gallon in the store?
What does our milk sell for a gallon? Organic milk in general is about twice conventional milk. Well, it's about $7 a gallon in the store. Now, so there's it's interesting. I'm going to have to talk to the grocery stores because we had the price was lower, and they suddenly raised their prices without me raising my prices, so I don't know what happened there. I was trying to keep it, I try to keep it as low as I can because I'm selling it to my friends and neighbors. And the truth is that I'm not a big enterprise analysis person. I don't like keeping records of any kind if I don't have to. And so the way we price our product is we just, so we can pay our bills and pay our help and make a living. We're not going to get rich on it, but we're fine, we're having a good time. And when our costs keep going up and up, eventually we have to raise the price of something here or there, and so we just do it that way. And I don't look at how much it costs to make this product and how much I do, you know. But there are some other products we'd like to do. I'd like to make fresh mozzarella, but I haven't quite gotten around to it. And a few other products we could make. And we don't have anybody working for us that really was a go-getter that would like to do it, and I wish we did, but I don't feel like I have the time to do that. And it's kind of funny because we have like a market, you know, we have to fill for the community, basically. And so we kind of have to juggle things because sometimes in the summer people go on vacation over Christmas, and so we sometimes have too much milk, and we give milk to the 3 food shelters when we have too much. And sometimes we're a little short. I try not to be, but then they get pretty upset with us. So, but it's kind of tricky to be able to do that. I gave a talk at Iowa State University with some extension specialists, and one of the farm management specialists came up afterwards and said, "What is your net profit per cow?" And I said, "I don't know." And he rolled his eyes and walked away. Because he was thinking, you know, if I have a net profit of this much per cow, I add 1 more cow, I get that much more money, right? But that's not the way it works. I have a market that I have to fill, and if I fill it with 80 cows or 90 cows, you know, it doesn't change how much I got to produce, and it wouldn't help to add 91 cows. So, any other comments, or what should, if you got any suggestions, what I should do better?
Did you run for governor once?
I ran for Iowa Secretary of Agriculture once. Yeah, in 2010.
That was a great interview. I read it. Neighbors, maybe? Was that you?
Maybe. I wanted to raise some issues, and so it was fun. Yes?
If you have more time, maybe the comments that you were going to make, but my question would be, in the broader picture of organics, how can we integrate more regenerative principles?
Integrate?
More regenerative principles.
Right. As a matter of fact, I'm actually on the National Organic Standards Board right now, and we have some problems is that the USDA doesn't always implement everything that is recommended. And the industry, I probably get, my term is up by the end of December, so they can throw me off if they want. But the industry really lobbies hard sometimes to keep, like there was animal welfare standards that were put out by the NOSB, and then USDA was going to, they put them off for public comment, ready to put them in place, and the industry laid on them hard, and they withdrew them. And so, now the Rodale Institute, there are several efforts. One of them is led by the Rodale Institute and some other collaborators to have an add-on regenerative organic certification. And I think that's a good idea because there are certain things like having to have soil instead of hydroponics, having animals on the land, on grass, certain things that I don't think we're ever going to achieve with USDA, but we could achieve that as an add-on. So I'm pretty much in favor of that. Well, let me just, actually, this is kind of related. So I recently got more land. We got 730 acres now, and it's all organic. And I've been doing some of this cover cropping. And my goal is to have every acre covered with a crop at all times, as much as possible. So in this case, this is cereal rye rolled down and to plant soybeans in this case. And what I did, I've been doing it 3 years now. The first year I came in, went right in with a drill with a standing rye and drilled in the soybeans. And then I came back and rolled it down. I didn't have the roller crimper the first year, so I just used a culti-mulcher. And actually, I did a pretty good job of rolling it down, except that it kind of plugged it up a little bit. But it works if you go with the same direction as you plant, or if you do it before planting and plant afterwards. But then I got the roller now. But it did a great job of laying it down, and then the soybeans started to grow up right through there, through that thick mat. And the recommendation is you need about 8,000 pounds per acre of cover crop in order to be a good weed control. And so up comes the soybeans, and they keep it on going and going. And you can see they're pretty clean for they're organic, no herbicides, and made it through the season. A few straggler weeds here and there, but that's okay. And they did really well. So I was pretty excited about it, and I've been doing a little more acres every year. This year, and, oh yeah, by the end of the year, this is after the soybeans are harvested, and you can see that the rye is still there, but it's pretty weak and decomposed. I grabbed some and I could just pull it apart. So you could easily no-till back into there, no problem. But it still is a great mulch. So it's really neat because you get all this biomass on the surface for a mulch, and you get all the biomass of the roots because you've grown that tall plant. Whereas most cover crops in Iowa, for example, the conventional farmers will grow them up about this high, and then they kill them with glyphosate, and they don't get a whole lot of biomass. But this way here, you're getting that tremendous biomass. And most of my land is very hilly, so I would never plant row crops on that hilly land. But now this is exciting because I can plant cash crops on this hilly land in a way that I can actually improve the land while I'm doing it instead of degrading it. So this year I did it again, third year, and I had a little setback. And I've heard of people having that, is that as the soybean plants popped out of the ground, some worms came through and they ate them off. And you can see the worm poop pellets right there, the evidence. And so I just came, after I figured it out, I came back and I drilled them back in again, and then they took off. So, you have to work with I'm still learning. I don't know what all the complications are going to be, but that's one of them apparently I have to watch for better next year. And then we got into a drought, and so it's a little bit, I didn't get quite as good a result this year, but I'm going to put 300 acres in this fall, so I'm not going to give up. And I have some options. If in the spring I don't have enough rye, I can still harvest the rye for seed for a cover crop and sell for about $12 a bushel. So there are several options I can do. And here's what I would normally do with soybeans. This is a Heinecker cultivator that has a full sweep between one sweep between each row, and it has in the middle it has wands that feel where the row is. So it'll keep the cultivator right on, and so they can have the sweeps go real close to the plant, and it'll adjust if you get off, if you fall asleep a little bit, it'll bring it back on place, So it works pretty well. You can see it does a pretty good job of controlling the weeds, but yet you have all that bare soil, and that's not. And most of my land, you can see it, only that little piece is level enough to do that on. So I really like this roll down. Now I did something else a couple of years ago. Just tried it on a couple acres. I planted oats and hairy vetch in the fall. And you can see the hairy vetch coming through. I had a little bit of radishes in there too that I had some extra seed I threw in there. And oats grew up really fast, past the rye up. I couldn't believe it. It grew taller than the rye. But then of course the oat dies when it freezes. But the idea is that the oats will kind of protect the hairy vetch during the winter. And what happened though is over the winter we had an ice storm and it really froze it down. I thought I killed all the hairy vetch, and I kind of gave up on it in the spring because the front half of that little field looked dead. And then I came back, I drove by like mid-June, and all of a sudden all this hairy vetch was there. I don't know where it came from, and especially in the back part of the field. And so we pulled around with the corn planter, and this is not a no-till corn planter. It's just a regular corn planter. It has even these clod clearers here, which I thought were going to plug up like crazy. And I thought I wouldn't get 10 feet down the road. But what was amazing is that hairy vetch laid right down and never plugged up anything. And I wouldn't have had to even roll it. I did roll it, but I waited a few days before I got around to it. But you can see it was already dead by the time I rolled it. But so I'm excited about this. But the only thing is it was late. The hairy vetch kind of heads out late. And you got to wait till these cover crops get into the reproductive stage. If you don't, like the rye, if you start to roll the rye down before it gets to the flowering stage, anthesis, it'll pop right back up again because it's still vegetative and it wants to be vegetative. But if you I wait a little longer. The recommendation is wait till it gets to anthesis, but I waited a little longer, like till the milk stage, and then it laid right down because by then it's reproductive. It doesn't want to come back up again. Same thing with the hairy vetch. It was far enough along that it laid right down. Now my friend in Iowa, he planted 40 acres like this. And he rolled it just at the beginning of flowering of the hairy vetch. And he said that he rolled it, and the next day it was popped right back up again. He rolled it again a different direction, and it popped back up again. And he had planted already. And so he got a chopper out, and he cut it all off. The next day it was up again. And he chopped it again. And then he had to cultivate. He had a blind cultivate it, he said, with one of these kind of cultivators like this. And he puts flags in all over so he could find the row. So the point is that he didn't wait long enough. He wanted, and he, you know, who knew? I didn't know. And I did it by default. I waited just long enough. But the weakness here is that you may have to wait too long to plant. And so there are earlier varieties of hairy vetch that maybe would work, and maybe there are other ways. But I don't mind waiting a little bit. You know, if you can, on land that is not otherwise suitable for this cropping, if you wait a little, I think I have another picture here, yeah. Here is the corn afterwards. And you can see, in the part where the hairy vetch was good, there's almost no weeds in there. And actually, I didn't see a lot of nitrogen deficiency. It looked like the nitrogen was adequate, because remember, hairy vetch is a legume, fixes nitrogen. That's the key why we're using hairy vetch for that. So there's a real potential there. And I don't mind if I have to plant a little later and get a little less yield. It's marginal land, and if I can do that on marginal land and improve the land at the same time, you know, it's a win-win. Yes?
People are experimenting with planting the soybeans at a regular time that they normally would, and then rolling the rye at first trifolia.
Yes, good question. Planting the soybeans ahead of rolling, and I just learned this last year. A number of people are doing exactly that. They come in, the rye's tall, you plant right in the rye, and you wait. And you can plant before the rye gets to the right stage. And you can wait, and people have waited until the soybeans are this tall and rolled it down with that roller crimper, and they said it didn't hurt it at all. And so it sounds kind of scary, but that way you can plant your soybeans early, and then you can roll at the right time for the rye.
The
Yeah.
challenge is where do you fit it in your rotation?
Exactly. Where do you fit in the rotation? And several options. One option I'm thinking is that after the soybeans, I can come back and plant wheat in the fall, and then I can have a crop of wheat that I harvest. And I mostly feed wheat to my cows. I feed about 4 to 5 pounds of grain, and it's often wheat. I have about 5,000 bushel of wheat now for this winter, more than I might need. So I can plant wheat then, and then next year I harvest the wheat like in midsummer, and so I have that window where I can get that rye in really early. And next time I'm going to try to start planting like Austrian peas or some other mixes with my rye. And so if you had a rotation with wheat and then rye followed by soybeans and then wheat, that would be one option. Or if that corn thing worked, I could come back in the fall after the wheat with hairy vetch and then come back with corn. So I'm still wondering what are the options. But the key I'm looking for is to try to see if I can have it covered all the time, something growing all the time. And I'm going to see if I can do it all, or virtually all, no-till. That way I don't have to really have bare soil, because as Ray Atchlow pointed out, there are two things that are important. One is not tilling if you can help it, and the other is always having that cover on the ground. So I don't know what the answer is, but I think there's a lot of possibilities here. I think it's probably time for everybody to go home, huh? All right, thank you.